Thank you all for having me here today with you. Look, the last 2 years, 2+ years, we've undergone unprecedented disruptions in both early care and education and K-12, two of the areas that my agency supports. Certainly for most educators across the state of Louisiana, this has been the most significant educational challenge of their careers, and it has required great amounts of creativity, patience, and resolve. Despite the pandemic, despite the storms, despite issues of civic and social unrest, we have persevered here in the state of Louisiana. There have even been moments of controversy along the way, but despite that, we have persevered, and we have been a resilient people in both early care and education, our children birth to 4, as well as our pre-K-12 students. Our 2022 LEAP data in the contents areas of science, social studies, math, and English have shown promise of a rebound. We are seeing early signs of academic recovery. In fact, we saw our most significant year-over-year increase in mastery rates, or what we call proficient, since 2016, this last year, and we are poised to continue that progress. Our data indicate that we saw a 3% increase in English rates across the state in our grades 3 through 8. We saw a 3% increase in our math rates in grades 3 through 8. We saw a 2% increase in science rates, and we saw status in social studies. So as one can tell, we are seeing elements of that academic recovery, but surely we still have work to do. And once we achieve those pre-pandemic levels, we still have to accelerate our learning in the state of Louisiana, where we've been long challenged. I credit these most recent results in part to a structured plan that we developed called Louisiana Comeback. We asked systems throughout the state to lock arms around 3 key areas: attendance and well-being, academic recovery and acceleration, and professional learning for our teachers. Every system built plans to address these 3 areas. We reviewed them, and once approved, we posted them for the public at louisianacomeback.com, our website. We also provided a financial dashboard for transparency to the public on how federal stimulus dollars are being invested in school systems across the state of Louisiana. Now, even with elements of academic recovery on the rebound, we know we have work to do and have begun Louisiana Comeback 2.0 using the same process as the last year. In the longer term, our efforts at our agency are situated around things that we believe matter most: early care and education, our children birth to 4, literacy efforts, where we know that for too long we've taken literacy for granted in our state and just assumed that children would learn how to read, and too few of them have. And we have to do something about it, and we are doing something about it. The transformation of our high schools across the state of Louisiana. We know that if a student graduates on May 15th, on May 16th, they deserve to be prepared to enter service, to enter a high-wage, high-demand job, or to go into college with deliberation. We also know that we need to elevate our teachers, the profession that begins all other professions. And finally, we'll continue to work so that every family is empowered, parents are in the driver's seat, and families get to choose the school that makes the most sense for their children. Of the many worthy topics that we could discuss, I thought school choice would make for an interesting date for me to bring to today's lunch. I'm frequently asked by both sides of the proverbial aisle, how can we increase parental involvement? It's a common question that I receive. I know of no greater way than allowing parents to select the school that makes the most sense for them and their family. When we're talking about increasing parental involvement, school choice should be an issue that matters to us all. Wealthy families across our state have exercised school choice for many years. Making it available to all families, however, regardless of income, could lift others out of both situational and generational poverty. Let's explore briefly the school landscape for choice in Louisiana at present. We have traditional public systems, and those systems are often open for choice. As an example, in Jefferson Parish Public Schools, all 8th graders have the opportunity to choose the high school of their choice for their 4 years of high school experience. We have public charters in the state of Louisiana, 174 across multiple types of charters, 174,000 kids across all types, and 151 schools. We have non-public schools in the state of Louisiana that serve about 96,000 students. We have a scholarship program or voucher program in our state where students are able, or their families are able, to receive vouchers to attend non-public schools, and that serves about 6,000 kids in the state of Louisiana. We've been able to increase the number of kids served and have funds to clear the waiting list and grow that scholarship program. We have almost 40,000 students who participate in homeschool, and now we know that as a result of the pandemic, learning pods are beginning to develop and expand throughout our state. But you might ask, what is on the horizon for school choice in the state of Louisiana? And I believe that we all could agree that one of the areas on the horizon, based on legislation from this last session and what we expect to see in years to come, are ESAs, educational savings accounts. Educational savings accounts give parents the opportunity to understand and appreciate and utilize the fact that funding follows the student. It doesn't go directly to the system, and the parent has ownership on the educational modality of choice for their child. We often have very public policy battles around publicly funded school choice in the state of Louisiana. That's often based on the quality of a neighborhood school or family income, as if only certain neighborhoods deserve choice, or if only certain income levels should qualify for choice. With universal choice, those fights subside. Choice does not have to work in opposition to traditional public schools. In fact, those schools must be the backbone of our educational promise. They long have been, and we must continue to support them in their quest for stronger outcomes for all of our kids. Traditional public schools, of which I'm a product, should be a choice option. Then the rising tide will lift all of the most effective boats for servicing our children. Funding students isn't a new concept, it's just newer. It's restricted in Louisiana, however. Moving forward, parents will demand personalization of educational modalities. By expanding educational freedom, we are better prepared to respond and meet this moment with excellence. So I am very proud of the work that's happened in the state of Louisiana over the last couple of years. I put the work of Louisiana's educators, of our parents, and certainly of our kids up against anything in this country for what we've been able to do. But as I mentioned earlier, our outcomes have been long challenged. Our kids, our families, our communities, and our state as a whole need and deserve stronger outcomes. We believe by focusing on the things that matter, such as early care and education, such as having a strategic plan to address the literacy crisis and have a reading revival in our state, such as transforming high schools so that they're not antiquated and that things such as CTE are elevated, vocational crafts are elevated. We're deliberate in the handoff between high schools and college for university, kids on the university track, and then continue to elevate the profession of teachers, that these things are really important. Outside of the parent or guardian, I know of no factor more important to the outcomes of a kid academically than a strong teacher in every classroom across our state. And so I just wanted to take a moment today to highlight the fact that as an agency, we believe that choice expands opportunities for our kids, choice expands opportunities for our families, and we wanted to use this opportunity today to further cement that belief that is what we consider to be important as the Louisiana Department of Education. So I thank you for your time, and I welcome any comments or questions that you may have. So the question is around what we can do to overcome a teacher shortage in the state of Louisiana. I think that we've made a good start. For one, at the turn of the calendar year last year, we surveyed school systems across the state of Louisiana. That the Department of Education had not previously done that. It's not a data point that we collect. But we surveyed human resource directors across the state, and we made a determination that we needed 2,520 additional teachers in the state. And that information helped us then shape legislative priorities going into last session. I think we had some really significant wins legislatively. The first I'll mention is the Go Teach initiative and the Go Teach Fund. So we've been able to expand across the state early college programs for individuals in high schools who may have a desire to be a classroom teacher. These programs allow students in our high schools to take college credit while in high school. Over the last couple of years, we've gone from less than 20 school systems in the state to over 50 that now have these programs. But the next step is actually the Go Teach Fund, and of course it has the Louisiana Go spelling. And what that allows us to do is students who are in early college programs who desire to be a teacher above TOPS can be funded with a college scholarship, so that if they go to a college of education in the state of Louisiana, they have the ability to receive a scholarship for that. So that's important. That fund also provides for individuals who are in other careers who might want to become certified as a teacher to also be able to utilize some of that funding. And we received a $5 million allocation for that project. I think that's really important. The second thing that we were able to do, legislation passed that allowed anyone with a master's degree in any field to go into the classroom with a mentor and with weekly professional development. And if they have 5 successful years of teaching, they automatically certify without some of the other bureaucratic barriers that might be faced. The other thing legislatively I believe that helped is the return to work legislation that allows retired teachers, particularly in critical shortage areas like math and science, special education, English as a second language, to be able to maintain their retirement benefits, but also step back into a classroom and teach and earn their pay as a classroom teacher. So I think those are 3 legislative wins to bring additional people into the classroom. But more important than even those things, I think that we should ask our teachers in our schools what's most important to them and what's preventing them from trying to recruit students and their friends to become teachers. And then we have to listen. We just launched the state's first Superintendent Teacher Council. We have, I believe, 22 teachers from across the state who I am using as advisement on key issues. We had roughly 900 teachers throughout the state apply for about 24 spots. And so that tells me teachers have something to say, and it tells me I need to listen to what they have to say. And so I think that if we can ask teachers what are some of those restrictions, I assume we'll hear things like classroom discipline. I assume we'll hear things like I want to make sure that at my school my voice is heard. I assume we'll hear things such as I want a principal that I find acceptable leading our school, and then of course professional compensation. So I think all those things have to continue to matter. The literacy crisis in the state of Louisiana and some of our proposals to help address that. First of all, I would share that the literacy crisis is not new. It is a crisis we have faced for a long time, but unfortunately, over essentially a decade, we flatlined. The NAEP test, which is a national test, tests students in 4th and 8th grade in reading. It tests them in 4th and 8th grade in math. And on the reading test, 4th graders in the state of Louisiana in 2011, the year 2011, scored an average 210 out of 500. Possible 500 points on a test. The average Louisiana 4th grader scored a 210, which translates to 55% of Louisiana students being at or above basic in their performance. That was 2011. In 2019, when NAEP was given again, the average Louisiana 4th grader scored a 210 out of 500, the exact same score, meaning that 55% of Louisiana's 4th graders were at or above basic. So over a period essentially of a decade, we flatlined. So if you look at other states around the country, it doesn't have to be this way. When we look at Mississippi, we can see that over the same given period of time, they put in place legislative initiatives, state agency initiatives, and they're the only state in the union, as far as I know, that's been able to grow their literacy rates over the last decade. So 2 years ago, we had a really strong legislative session. We had legislative members across the aisle working to support our legislative proposals. We had that happening at our state board level. And whenever I go into schools today, I see more energy around reading than probably we've seen for sure in the last decade. So I'm excited about that. I think we are doing the right things around literacy, and I'm happy to talk about all those in detail. However, you're asking about the most recent proposal that we made, which suggests that if a student in grades kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th isn't reading on grade level by the end of the school year, that they would participate in 30 additional hours of support over the summer. If they participate in those hours, they're able to promote to the next grade. Students with exceptionalities, that would be an IEP decision by a team of individuals who would make that decision. We introduced that last week for the first time. At this point, we are taking feedback on that proposal. I'm sure that there will be modest revisions to that proposal moving forward. But whenever people ask, in short term, what is the issue that is your keep you up at night type issue? You hear that question from time to time. The educational issue that I think about most right now, not a long-term issue, but a short-term issue, would be the current third and fourth graders. And let me tell you why I think that this group of students are the ones for which we have to be most concerned. If you are a third grader in Louisiana right now, your kindergarten year was impacted by the Friday the 13th of 2020 school closings, what impacted a third of your year. You then went into the next year, and it was a year of starts and stops and interruptions, virtual, face-to-face, virtual, starts and stops, quarantines. You went into the next year, and it was more or less normal, but we still had COVID interruptions, and also on those 2 subsequent years, we faced Laura, Delta, and Ida. So our third graders, who were kindergartners when schools were originally closed, have been severely impacted. The same holds true for a fourth grader. A fourth grader was a first grader when schools were closed, which is a foundational year for literacy learning. And so we have to be laser focused on the current third and fourth graders across the state because of the unprecedented disruptions they have faced the last 2 years. And it's not just about the fact of what this will mean in terms of the K-12 experience over the next 10 years in our schools. It's the fact that what this is going to mean for their lives. Because a child that's not reading on grade level by the end of third grade and certainly by the end of fourth grade is at a much greater risk to be a dropout. We also know that roughly 80% of people in prisons across our country today do not have a high school diploma. And this really matters when we're thinking about our third and fourth graders. So I'm not going to back down in an effort to do everything within my power to ensure that our third and fourth graders recover as quickly as possible. I mentioned controversy earlier. Look, I believe that our schools should have been open for face-to-face daily instruction. Very publicly, that was my position. I believe that we could do the things that mattered in terms of mitigation, and I believe we did. Our schools were not super spreader locations of the virus, as confirmed by individuals in the medical community, not by me. I further believe that decisions such as masking were best made at the local level with moms and dads and local boards that knew the local context of their communities. In terms of vaccines, I believe that that's a parent's decision. I believe that every child should have had access to the vaccine. Every faculty and staff member should have had access. But when it came to our children, I believe that that's a very personal family matter, and it should have been a parent's decision. When we're talking about quarantines, I believe that since we were not a super spreader location, that we should be empowering parents to make those decisions in the best interest of their children. But overall, I think that we did a really good job in the state of Louisiana, particularly compared to other places across the country, of working together to educate our children. We know that we have learning loss as a result of the pandemic. We know that was more challenging here in our state because of the hurricanes that we also faced. But I think the decision to have our schools open was the right decision. And I believe that history will show I was on the right side of that decision. So the question is around accountability measures for high school students. I'll have to provide some additional context. I have the ability to go around the state and talk with individuals in higher ed. I have the ability to talk to individuals in business. And they tell me the same thing. They'll say, there aren't enough students in our state graduating 12th grade ready for university life, or there aren't enough students who are graduating with the basic skills necessary to come to work. And, you know, I hear that time and time again. And one of the policy levers that we have as a state agency and certainly as a state board is an accountability system. And I think our school accountability system in the state of Louisiana has to do a couple of things. For one, I think it needs to incentivize and draw attention to the areas of focus that are most important, such as literacy, such as career and technical education. You name the things, and whatever we put in that formula are the things that are most valued in our schools. So it's an opportunity there. The second function, I believe, of a school accountability system that's important is giving the public an honest look, a transparent look into school quality. And so I have been committed over the last couple of years around our high schools and thinking about how can we break down barriers that presently exist to students being better prepared either for university or for work. In my background, I've served both as a superintendent of a rural system and a superintendent of a large urban system. And in both of those instances, my challenges were the same in that there's too much bureaucracy around what's required, standardized for a diploma, and also there's not enough time in the day. So what we have tried to do with our Fast Forward initiative is, and what we have done with our Fast Forward initiative, it allows schools in partnership with workforce, in partnership with community colleges and institutions of higher ed, to rethink particularly junior and senior year, and to sub out some of the current requirements for a high school diploma for other opportunities. An example would be an apprenticeship. We have a pathway developed now where our students, junior and senior year, can go and be an electrical apprentice. They can do that as a junior, be electrician 1, as a senior, be electrician 2, and graduate from high school with publicly funded opportunity to become an apprenticeship. And they would graduate both with an apprenticeship and their high school diploma. I think if I went around the room, most people would say that's a pretty good idea. I can tell you about instances we have now where we have high school students who, instead of going to their traditional high school for their junior and senior year, they go to a local hospital and they learn how to be an LPN. And instead of graduating simply with a high school degree, they're graduating with that plus the high school degree. And so the challenge is incentivizing those behaviors. If we're talking about an apprenticeship right now, that earns 0 points in our state's accountability formula. I think if I talk to business leaders around the state, they would tell me that they value apprenticeships and it should be worth something in the accountability formula. And so our present accountability formula for our high schools has 70% of our high schools rated as A and B across the state of Louisiana. They have met the mark that we have set for them. That mark has been met by 70% of our high schools. But unfortunately, our average ACT score is an 18. When we're talking about our average content scores for proficiency in the key subject areas, it's a 37%. We know that 9 students, 9 out of over 40,000, graduated with an apprenticeship 2 years ago. And so there's an opportunity now to raise the standard for quality, and there's an opportunity to incentivize some of the things such as an apprenticeship that we believe should hold value. I will continue to work with superintendents. I have strong relationships with that group. I'll continue to work with them around their proposal. But the proposal that we have worked on for a couple of years, and it will be heard by our state board in October. So is the question about outcomes or funding? I'm sorry. Okay. All right. I initially understood the question to be about funding. Yeah. So if you look across the South, we're not necessarily, our funding is not necessarily lower than other states in the South. If you compare us to some of the states in the Northeast, then yes, we have lower funding than those states. But if you look at us across the South, we are not necessarily funded less than those other states. In many examples, we're funded more so than those other states. The question around outcomes is the one that we're trying to solve for. I'll go back to the things that I think matter. You know, there's not one thing that matters. I think early care and education matters. Less than half of our kids come on day one with the skills needed to be successful on day one. Less than half. Literacy rates are in the 40s when students are leaving the 3rd grade. And we've already talked about some of our high school outcomes. So we'll continue to work on early care, literacy, transforming high schools, elevating teachers. We know that we're over 2,000 teachers short. It's hard to get great outcomes in the classroom if you don't have a teacher in the classroom. And then the other piece, which was the point of the conversation, the main point of the conversation today, which I think is an important piece, is continuing to offer families choice on the school that makes the most sense for them. Just from a competition structure alone, I think that if choice is introduced, then there is the element of choice that is the element of options for families. We certainly have poverty rates that are high. Education and economic policy go hand in hand. Economic and healthcare and education all go hand in hand. So there's not like one reason to say this is the challenge, but I think that there are a multitude of things where we need to work, which are, again, the things that we've called out, but I'm also happy to always hear around other issues that people think are important. And none of these issues, none of these initiatives, whether we're talking early care, whether we're talking literacy, where one would think it's not controversial, but none of these issues go without controversy because there's policy decisions behind them and there are lives behind them. And so we will continue to push on these areas because we think they're most important issues. When we talk about educational freedom, we talked short term around third and fourth graders that is of utmost concern today. But long term, I think we need to be thinking more about educational freedom and school choice for families and further empowering parents, because seldom do I not get the question, what can we do to increase parental involvement? I know a few things more impactful than allowing the parent to be able to select the school of choice for them. The question is, do teachers in private schools and charter schools make more money than traditional systems? I would say that varies. It varies from system to system. I think it varies from non-public to non-public, and it certainly varies from charter to charter. What I would say about compensation is that I think moving forward, and again, very much on the record for this and have implemented this in a couple of systems, I think moving forward we need to make sure that our teachers have a base pay that honors them as a professional, but I also think we should be thinking about teachers who have certificates that the market says are in high demand, math, science, special education, ESL, should they earn additional compensation? Teachers who are willing to take on more challenging assignments, should they earn additional funding? Teachers who are willing to take on leadership roles within their school and lead weekly professional development or mentor other teachers, should they receive additional funding? And then teachers who are doing an outstanding job with their kids and seeing tremendous outcomes and growth with their kids, should they earn additional funding? So I think moving forward, just a simple step and ladder approach probably isn't as responsive as we need to be for the future of our educational system. Okay, so it's a funding issue relative to traditional public and public charter. The first thing I would say to this, and this needs to be quotable, charter schools are public schools. And whenever we look at the landscape in the state of Louisiana and we look at the opportunities for educational freedom moving forward, we need a portfolio approach. Someone recently said it was frustrating that as a state superintendent of education that I was advocating for school choice. You know, I think moving forward, the demands of parents, the demands of taxpayers, one of the things that will be most important is the opportunity around school choice. And I think that we should develop a portfolio model where we are not limiting options for families, but we're expanding options for families. And so for many families, that's going to be homeschool. And so that's why I'm a proponent of homeschooling. For many families, it's going to be enrolling in a public charter. I think overwhelmingly, most families are going to select their traditional neighborhood school. They run into the same people at the grocery store. The teacher also taught their sister. I mean, there are relationships built within local communities that draw people to their local neighborhood school, and I think that's important. And that's why they're a backbone of what we have to do and what has been done. But we should expand options around choice, which means public charter, which means homeschooling, which means scholarship for non-public organizations. And then moving forward, I think a new area that we haven't talked much about is just learning pods. And these pandemic pods grew as a result of what happened over the last couple of years, where you had clusters of families working together to educate their children while schools were closed. And then ultimately, I think what we will see will be additional considerations around educational savings accounts. There were 2 educational savings accounts that moved through the entire bills, that moved through the entire legislative process last year, out of a handful that were placed on the governor's desk that were vetoed. And so those ESAs, I think we will see those plus others again in the future. And I think it's important because I think we ought to do everything that we can do to further empower parents.
But the funding in that, do you think that?
There's no difference in funding. It's around some of the autonomy maybe that's provided. I don't know that we should be in a situation where we're restricting our public charters. And in fact, the federal administration, the Biden administration, has recently tried to further restrict charters. And so I have had a letter out to the U.S. Secretary of Education trying to help him further understand that now is not the time to restrict access to choice for families. Now is the time to expand choice. And I felt like their rules around the charter school program were not right and were not appropriate. And so I wanted to make sure that they understood where we were as a state on that particular matter.
If I could follow up.
Yeah, so his question is around New Orleans. Lanny, I'll try to get this right. Your question is around New Orleans and how well the charter model has worked there. I rarely run into anyone who does not tell me that the quality of schools in New Orleans today isn't stronger than it was 20 years ago. And so if we look at that, and if we look at some of the basic academic outcomes, I believe that we have to agree, or we don't have to agree, I have to share that I believe that relative to what exists, certainly pre-Katrina, that we're in a better position. I'm excited about some of the new leadership in New Orleans, looking forward to working with them as they think about some of their most pressing issues that they're facing. But do I think that it worked? Yes, I think it worked relative to what exists pre-Katrina. But Lanny, also, we have to make sure that we have a charter environment in our state. We have to make sure we have a charter environment that prompts high-quality operators to want to be here and to want to succeed here. And we also have to recognize that choice does not have to work in opposition of traditional neighborhood schools. I am a product of a traditional neighborhood school. I taught in a traditional neighborhood school. I led 2 school systems that you would view as a traditional school system, although in the second, we opened additional charters. I just feel like if we want to respond to the needs of parents, we need to ensure that we're expanding options for them. So the question is around legislation for 3rd grade retention if students are not on grade level for reading. Clearly, we think this is important. Clearly, we think that this is one of the components of the Mississippi model that they believe worked. We will, if the legislation is filed again, and I believe it will be, we will work with our board to determine what is the board's official position on that particular piece of legislation. But in the meantime, that's why I've offered a policy around additional supports in the summer. And if children don't participate in those additional supports, that would lead to retention.
Do you personally think that it's a good idea?
Well, we would have to work with our board and determine what the position of the board would be around that particular piece of legislation. I do know that it was one of the pieces of legislation in Mississippi that they credit with some of their results. So I think it would be foolish to not explore it as an option here in Louisiana. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Our team works really hard on early care and education. I often offer that one of the almost hidden success stories of the pandemic was early care and education. At the onset of the pandemic and for the first couple of months, less than 30% of early care centers I hate to use the word, but it helps people understand daycare centers, but early care centers across the state, only about 30% were open. We were able to provide focus. We were able to use some of the federal funding and get 99% of those centers open. And we prioritized that because we realized if those early care centers weren't open, it would be near impossible for our economy to fully open because parents needed a place for their children. And that's even beyond the academic and social needs that are provided in early care centers. So really think that our early care industry is one that deserves praise over the last couple of years, and the heroic work as heroic work that teachers did, the heroic work of early care providers just to be open. Because had they not been open, moms and dads, I don't know that moms and dads would have been able to go back to work. So she's asking how we could further work with parents on navigating issues around school selection. Look, I think it's a good question. I think it's a place where we have to do more work. It is a complicated process oftentimes to select a school, particularly in Louisiana, where we have options that aren't necessarily available in other places. And as we move forward, I think that you raise a really good point of how can we work to make sure that's as effective and efficient as possible. The ESA proposal, for instance, that we talked about before, an educational savings account, should something like that pass, what I would envision would be basically a one-stop shop, which would be a website that offered options for families, and they would have essentially a debit account, and they would purchase services. Potentially they purchase services at a traditional public school. Potentially they purchase services in a non-public. Potentially they purchase piano lessons. There would be a number of options available for families, but I think if we move to that point where ESAs do exist, structuring that process would certainly be more simplified because we could house it in one location with myriad opportunities for selection from parents. But it is, I don't want to discredit your question that it is challenging to navigate, and also it's really important that our accountability model that was referenced earlier be appropriate, because that's how many parents determine school choice and get a better sense of school quality. First of all, thank you for the work that you do as a representative and on education. You were always, Representative Freiberg, you were always most engaged with the process and interested in learning about the process, and you have experience in the process. So her question is about the 30 hours, should that pass, how would the 30 hours be delivered? Look, I think more important than the 30 hours is just a continued urgency around the need to effectively respond. As one superintendent said last week at the advisory council, he said, the bottom line is I need to make sure my kids are reading before the end of the year. And I think that's what's most important about the policy. Now, should a child not be reading on grade level by the end of the year, and they fall into that category, it's hard for me to appreciate how 30 additional hours of support in a small group with a teacher trained in the science of reading with high quality resources wouldn't be helpful. And so we will make sure, beyond a vote on that proposal, should that win favor, that we provide school systems, system leaders, superintendents, principals with a framework of how to do this. But more so than anything, the things that are going to be important would be a teacher trained in the science of reading. We're training all K-3 teachers across the state right now in high quality, back to the basics approaches around phonics, small group, and then making sure that at the beginning we know where they are and at the end we know where we are, so that as they step into that next school year, the school can have as much real-time live data as possible to pick the child up where they are at that first day of school and try to move them forward. So we will develop those resources.
Yeah, you won't just throw the money at the expected.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and the other thing to note about this policy, Rep, is we have it sunsetting in 2 years. So it's effective, it would be effective for this upcoming summer and the year after, which targets the pandemic impacted children, but it also falls in line with the availability of federal stimulus dollars that are supposed to be used for efforts such as this. So we try to be thoughtful around that.
Okay, thank you very much.
We wanted to talk about the things that matter most: early care and education, literacy, transforming our high schools, elevating teachers, but wanted to spend more time on school choice and talking through options to ensure that every family across the state has the opportunity to select a school that makes the most sense for them, for their children.
How would that work?
Well, I think we have to have a portfolio of opportunities for families. I think we need to further put parents in the driver's seat around educational outcomes. And furthermore, people will ask me the question, what can we do to increase parental engagement? What can we do to get more parental involvement? You know, I don't know of anything that could be more impactful for that than allowing families to choose the school that makes the most sense for them.
And how would that differ from the way it is right now?
I think it's just continuing to expand opportunities. I think more often than not, families are going to want to choose their traditional neighborhood school where they know the individuals in the community, they have long-standing relationships, but I don't think we should restrict other options, and so that's what we will continue to do, is to try and open up options for families.
You talked about teacher shortage. What is the situation in Louisiana, and what do you project moving forward?
We know that last year at the turn of the year, we needed about 2,000 additional teachers. We're in the process right now of determining what that number looks like this year. We know that we had a really strong legislative session last year to address some of the issues, but we need to get a better sense of where we are in real time right now to consider further policy implications.
What about literacy? Where does Louisiana stand right now with literacy, and what is it going to take to move to the next level?
Well, we need to go back to the basics in literacy. We need to stop confusing future teachers. We need to stop confusing kids. Phonics works. Letters make sounds, sounds make words, words make sentences. We need to train everyone in phonics, which is what we're doing. And I think what will happen is we'll begin to see better results.
You mentioned the state of Mississippi having results. In what area they have results, and what could that mean for Louisiana?
Well, look, Mississippi is the only state in the union that over the last decade has seen an increase in their literacy rates. And so we're trying to mirror much of their legislation and their policy decisions. In many ways, we're being more aggressive, and we think that likewise, we too will see literacy improvement. We're pretty confident in that.
What would you like people to keep in mind about the importance of public education in the state?
Look, public education is a backbone of our state, and we need to make sure that families have options for all sorts of education in the state. We have to be great during the 40 hours a week, give or take, that we have children, but kids are in the communities for an additional 128 hours. So those hours have to be great too. And so we just need to make sure that we continue to do everything in our power to get better for our kids, for our families, and for our communities.
How can people get more information?
Our website's Louisiana Believes. Always just jump on there or follow us on social media, Twitter, Facebook. We have options available where we can stay connected.